Hey guys, welcome to CraterMania. I'm your host, the man they call Crater, and I'd like to welcome you all back to the 500 movies in 2025. And also welcome back to the Halloween Hoedown here on YouTube, where we are celebrating Halloween based movies all of October. And back here again after I just did one a couple of nights ago. I know I wasn't supposed to do this episode I'm doing right now. I was supposed to have done this last night, but I was feeling a little under the weather last night. So I'm going ahead and just put this episode out today. And then later on this evening, I'm going to be doing another episode on the Back to the Future trilogy. So stay tuned for that one as well. But like I said, we are just little under a week away from Halloween, from trick or treat night, from however you want to spend the holiday. So we're almost at the end of the month here, and we're just getting closer and closer. Like I said, to Halloween. So anyhow you guys are spending that this year, just remember to stay safe and just don't get into too much trouble. You know what I mean? But of getting into trouble, let's talk about the first movie that we're going to be talking about on tonight's episode. Um, before I get into that, so I guess I should mention, as I always do, what number we're at with these movies. So this is 370 through 374 of the 500 movies in 2025. And like I said, let me just run that back. So speaking of getting into trouble, let's talk about tonight's first movie. And as you guys know, I'm a lifelong fan of horror, everything spooky and macabre, just particularly, around this time of year as well. Because, like I said many times, this is my favorite time of year. Halloween is my favorite holiday, and when it comes to Rob Zombie's cinematic universe, um, you know, with the Halloween remakes aside, and maybe a couple other movies he's done, but mainly his first features he's done, is they always kind of feel like a kind of a Halloween time carnival to me. Just he had this signature blend, of like just gritty exploitation and kind of grotesque imagery and just not just with his movies, but just like in his music videos, and his with all of his music and everything as well. And he always kind of has these very relentless driving soundtracks as a way of kind of burrowing under your skin, and staying there, you know, um, when it comes, to the movie soundtracks and just his music in general. And when it comes to his movies and his directorial debut, I think, House of a Thousand Corpses is a film that has continued to resonate with me and a lot of other fans. And it's just kind of this perfect storm, of this like 70s horror homage. And, Rob Zombie has this very distinct, twisted vision. And he just delivered as this kind of like a, you know, um, very like blood soaked Halloween night adventure. You know what I mean? And House of a Thousand Corpses is just an assault on the senses. It's almost like a fever dream that's kind of conjured, from these darkest corners of like, American roadside culture and, kind of steeped in this kind of blood of just classic horror. Um, it was released in 2003, and this kind of black comedy horror film just marks Rob Zombie's, um, foray into directing, just this, which is a natural progression, from his, established career as a musician, and his work, just creating that, the iconic, Universal Studios, Hollywood Halloween Horror Nights attractions. Um, the film itself is just a is the beginning, of like the Firefly family saga, and so it introduced, a lot of audiences to this kind of these psychopathic killers who just embody, the darkest, aspects of American Gothic culture. Um, And and the premise of this film, while seemingly kind of simple, it really sets the stage for this descent into madness. So it's October 30th, 1977, and these four young friends, Jerry Goldsmith, um, or I think it's his name. So it's Jerry, Bill, Mary, and I think Denise was the other one's name. So they kind of all embark on this kind of cross country like road trip, and their mission is to document these eccentric roadside attractions, for this book that they're writing, and their journey just takes them to this kind of bizarre rundown gas station and horror museum that's known as Spalding's, and it's ran by the delightfully unhinged Captain Spaulding, played by Sid Haig, and which is a career defining role, I think, for Sid Haig. And it's here that they stumble upon, the local legend of Dr. Satan, who's this mad doctor who was just, supposedly hanged from a tree in the area. So their pursuit of this kind of morbid tale leads them to this kind of seemingly chance encounter with this free spirited hitchhiker named Baby, who's played by Sherry Moon, which is a lot of people know her as Rob Zombie's wife. And Baby, she seemingly, it's seemingly innocent, but she invites um, these people to her family farm to get help for their car. That's I guess they're having something wrong with the tire or whatever, or something, or maybe the engine. I can't remember exactly what was going on with the car, but and this becomes kind of like their fateful turning point in their lives, and on this night. So what follows is just this kind of horrifyingly it just this spiral into the Firefly family's lair, their world, where they just meet these deeply disturbed members of the family, like, so you have Otis, played by Bill Moseley, and his, I mean, eerily perfect portrayal of Otis. Then you have Tiny and the mother Firefly, and played by Karen Black. And then you also have Grandpa Hugo. So, what sets House of a Thousand Corpses apart from like a typical slasher flick is this the deliberate pacing, and just that construction of atmosphere throughout the film. Rob Zombie, he isn't in a rush to get to the gore. Though when it arrives, it's just unflinching and impactful. Uh, but instead, he reveals in that kind of absurdity and just that sheer, creepiness of the Firefly family. So, this kind of where they all these members of the family are very eccentric, and just this kind of chilling and cheerful demeanor, while kind of discussing these unspeakable acts, and just they're just that grotesque home environment is just all just very well crafted here by Rob Zombie. Um, the film is just this visual feast of just grime and decay and just the very vibrant and unsettling colors, and just a very deliberate, homage to the aesthetics of 70s horror films like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and The Hills Have Eyes. Um, so the story just kind of cleverly weaves in multiple storylines. Um, the initial pursuit of Dr. Satan becomes secondary as the focus shifts into the survival or lack thereof of the friend group here. So we witness these kind of their individual fates unfold. So Bill is subjected to just this gruesome artistic mutilation, and Mary is tormented and just eventually brutally you know taken out by Baby, and then Jerry is just partially scalped, and Denise, she faces this nightmarish ordeal that just culminates in this terrifying encounter with Dr. Satan. Um, and just his grotesque creations in this underground layer. So the film doesn't shy away from depicting just the sheer horror of their captivity, but it also injects moments of dark humor that while disturbing is just undeniably part of Rob Zombie's signature style. Um, so the film's journey to the screen was um, I don't know how to say it. So it was initially shelved. So by its it was shelved by the studio just due to the fears of this NC-17 rating, and Rob Zombie fought to reacquire the rights and eventually find a home with Lionsgate Entertainment. So this struggle for release just speaks to the film's kind of boundary pushing nature, and despite this kind of a this very low critical reception, House of a Thousand Corpses really found its stronghold in just the cult following that would come later, and just it resonated with audiences like myself, just appreciated that raw energy and that kind of unapologetic embrace of horror's grittier side, and that success would pave the way for the Devil's Rejects, and then the later installment, Three from Hell, which I could have done without, honestly. I think out of the first two from the Firefly family trilogy, um, I love Devil's Rejects. I think that's honestly Rob Zombie's best film. Um, but I do love House of a Thousand Corpses because it just really establishes who those characters in the Firefly family are for you to even care about them later in the Devil's Rejects and then Three from Hell. But like I said, Three from Hell is not the worst movie in the world or anything, but I could have done without it. You know what I mean? Um, and so let's talk a little bit about Rob Zombie. So before, stepping behind the camera, Rob Zombie was already a household name for a lot of people, as the front man and for the iconic heavy metal band White Zombie. And then, then later, he would have his own successful solo career, which I think is kind of like, what he's more well known for nowadays anyway, because he's been with his solo band a lot longer than he was when he was with White Zombie. But anyway, his music is just kind of characterized by that very aggressive sound, just kind of often laced with just dark and horror based, lyrical themes, and just he has a very strong visual aesthetic that's influenced by horror films, and sci-fi movies, and um, just a general love for the grotesque. You know what I mean? So um, this background, directly kind of informs his filmmaking. So, his directorial debut with House of a Thousand Corpses is just this kind of a clear, manifestation of his lifelong passion for horror. So, he is just known for that kind of distinctive visual style, which is just vibrant and often lurid and just heavily saturated aesthetic that just feels both retro and hyper modern. But his films, are characterized by this kind of relentless energy, just a heavy dose of that dark humor and just a deep appreciation for that, the exploitation movies of the 1970s and the 1980s. He just has this knack for, creating memorable and often terrifying characters that are, larger than life, and he's not afraid to pushing the boundaries when it comes to gore and disturbing imagery. And just beyond House of a Thousand Corpses, like I said earlier, he directed Devil's Rejects, and then he did his own version of Halloween in 2007, and then the sequel to that in 2009. Then he's known for like The Lords of Salem, 31, and so on. But and each of them kind of have their own like um followings from fans. There's some people that love only like House of a Thousand Corpses and Devil's Rejects, maybe a couple other his films, while some of his fans love all of his movies, and then there's some fans out there that don't like any of these movies. So the followings for Rob Zombie and his films are kind of like all over the place. But House of a Thousand Corpses has really just kind of carved out this um, significant niche, in the horror landscape, and its legacy, just it's far exceeding its kind of initial critical reception. Um, if you firstly, it kind of reinvigorated, the family of killers theme. While films like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Hills Have Eyes, had explored kind of similar territory. Rob Zombie's Firefly family just kind of possessed this unique, almost theatrical brand of terror. They weren't just these mindless monsters; they were these characters with these distinct personalities and just a twisted sense of like family values, is kind of making that all the more unsettling. And I think this allowed the film to really stand out in a genre that can sometimes feel saturated with similar killer types. um and secondly, it cemented Rob Zombie's voice in filmmaking. So this movie was more than just his directorial debut. It was just this kind of declaration of intent. It showcased his unique vision and his influences, and just his ability to just translate, his musical, aesthetic into this visual medium, which he had already done, in his like music videos and stuff as well. But this, when it comes to film, that's a whole nother animal. You know what I mean? Like this film's distinctive look, its soundtrack, the pacing of it, and just that blend of horror and dark, excuse me, and dark comedy becomes this instantly recognizable as, hey, that's a Rob Zombie film. So this kind of paved the way for him to become this, very prominent and respected voice, in modern horror cinema. You know, from some people, like I said, I know there's some people out there that don't like these films or don't like Rob Zombie at all. But I have to say that I am a fan. When it comes to some of his, I'm a fan of his music, like mostly. But when it comes to his films, um, you know, I feel like they're hit and miss personally. But I love House of Thousand Corpses. I love The Devil's Rejects. I loved 31. Um, I kind of liked his remake of Halloween. I don't like Halloween, Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. Didn't really care for Lords of Salem, but yeah, I mean, overall, I can say that I'm a fan of his films for the most part. And but it also, this movie really cultivated a passionate cult following, as I mentioned. So the film's initial release was met with mixed reviews, as I said, but it did find its audience. Like I said, the fan base just grew over time. It was, people were drawn to that raw energy and just that unapologetic gore, and just that, the loving homage to classic horror. So this kind of cult status has just ensured the film's um the longevity of it all, and just has really provided this kind of solid foundation, for the Firefly universe. Um, and it's the kind of film, that fans discover and then they just become kind of fiercely loyal to. Um, but and then like I mentioned earlier, about the Universal Studios Halloween Horror Nights. So this film's influence pretty much helped create Universal Studios Halloween Horror Nights, because Rob Zombie initially worked on that, and so that's what really inspired the film. Um, so it really saw the film itself translated back into this haunted house attraction. So does that make sense? You know what I mean when I say that? So like that kind of symbiotic relationship between, his cinematic and just his kind of experiential work is a testament, I think, to this immersive, quality of his creations. So the House of a Thousand Corpses haunted house became this popular fixture, just allowing fans, to step directly into the film's world there at Universal Studios. Um, but it also demonstrated just the viability of niche horror. In an era where mainstream horror kind of often leans towards PG-13 jump scares, House of a Thousand Corpses proved that there was a significant audience for more extreme, R-rated, and just artistically driven horror. Its success, although on a smaller scale, encouraged just other filmmakers to kind of explore grittier and more unconventional horror stories. Um, but in conclusion, for me personally, House of a Thousand Corpses is one of those perfect Halloween night movies. It's just it's that kind of equivalent of a haunted house that's both terrifying and just exhilarating. It's filled with jump scares and grotesque imagery and just kind of a perverse sense of fun. Um, Rob Zombie just has this way of tapping into this kind of primal fear and just morbid curiosities that really makes Halloween such a beloved holiday. Um, the film's just relentless energy and, Captain Spaulding's just wonderfully depraved hosting, just the sheer audacity of the Firefly family's evil and uh, just that kind of descent into hell, almost with Dr. Satan's lair, just all combined to create this unforgettable experience. Um, it's a film I think that doesn't shy away from the darkness, but just kind of rather embraces it with this, almost like with a twisted grin. But every rewatch of this film, especially around this time of year, it really feels like a homecoming to this kind of wonderfully wicked place. Just a testament to Rob Zombie's, enduring power to just create these worlds that are both horrifying and just absolutely captivating. Um, I think it is without a doubt like a a cornerstone of his film career. And it's a film that I'll continue to revisit and cherish for many years to come. And definitely, if you guys have never seen House of a Thousand Corpses, definitely check it out. But moving on to the next film. So this next film is a movie that I've only seen a handful of times, and I think the first time I ever watched it was many years ago. I can't remember tell you how long ago it was, but um, it was during the time when Netflix was still doing like the DVDs through the mail, and I had just randomly placed this movie on my queue for it to be next in line to be sent to me to watch. And initially, I didn't know what to think about this movie. And I went after I watched it. I went years without ever watching it again. I think um, the next time I watched it was like a year or so ago, whenever Joe Bob played it on the last drive-in. So that was like between that time that I rented it through the Netflix DVD thing years ago, and there was many years that went by before I watched this movie, and then I watched this movie again this year. I guess it was probably just be my third time I'd ever watched it. So, and I'll start by saying, as a diehard horror fan, especially when it comes to the kind of Halloween centric movies. Watching this movie, which is, by the way, is Jeff Lieberman's Satan's Little Helper. This this is kind of an underrated gem, I think. I mean, it's definitely, it takes a few times for you to truly appreciate it. So it's a very darkly comedic, horror film. And like I said, it was written, directed by Jeff Lieberman. And it just tells this story, of this young boy's, kind of unwitting alliance with this serial killer on Halloween night. So really what unfolds here is just this kind of blend of satire and homage and just these very gruesome thrills that just leave, even I think the most jaded horror enthusiasts out there, grinning because it's not the best made film in the world, but it's definitely got a lot of humor to it to where it's entertaining and it's got a lot of charm to it. And, just so the story centers around this little boy named Dougie, who is this, he's a 9-year old who's obsessed with this ultra violent video game, which is titled Satan's Little Helper. And, so his role model becomes the devil pretty much, but it's just in a video game form. And where he's a little kid, he has trouble differentiating the what's real and what's fake. So when his sister Jenna brings her boyfriend Alex, home for Halloween, Dougie becomes convinced that this stranger that he has met is dressed in this devil costume, and that he encounters on the street, which is later revealed to be this, the actual killer, is the embodiment of his video game nemesis, or hero, I guess I should say. Um, so as Dougie, navigates this series of kind of gruesome events, including the murder of his father and the kidnapping of his mother, he finds himself torn between his loyalty to his family and his fascination with these horrific deeds that Satan is um, is performing. So Jeff Lieberman, who's known, for his kind of earlier cult classics such as Squirm and Just Before Dawn, he brings this very distinctive touch to his horror sensibilities in Satan's Little Helper by, seamlessly, like integrating these elements of just dark comedy and, the film subverts audience expectations and kind of pokes fun, at horror themes while still delivering, a very satisfying, if not, occasionally disturbing, adventure here, if you want to call it that. So the script is very clever, I think, and just full of just dark humor. Often kind of find that perfect balance, between gruesome set pieces and just these kind of laugh out loud moments. And the cast, which is uh, just really it really delivers impressively. These committed performances, just particularly the child actor that plays Dougie. His character's kind of gradual descent into the darkness of just the killer's world is both unsettling and sympathetic. Just making his ultimate confrontation with the truth all the more impactful. So the supporting cast is just equally effective, in their own respective roles, just adding depth and relatability to an otherwise fantastical premise. And upon this movie's release, it garnered some positive reviews from critics who just praised its unique blend of horror and comedy. Um, as well as Jeff Lieberman's, successful navigation of tone. Um, and it wasn't a huge commercial success or anything, but the film has since developed this cult following, like a lot of other films that I always talk about on here, just among horror enthusiasts, and just kind of continues to be cited as this kind of um, this innovative entry in that subgenre of horror comedies. Um, but in terms of legacy, Satan's Little Helper has just influenced, I think, a new wave of filmmakers as well that were interested in exploring, darker themes within the horror genre. I think this movie helped pave the way for horror comedies like Trick or Treat or American Mary, which they also kind of balance those gruesome visuals with kind of clever writing and just a keen sense of humor. Um, but in conclusion, Satan's Little Helper is just a very delightful horror film that just successfully blends that dark humor and satire and those gruesome thrills, and just Jeff Lieberman's his direction just was coupled with this strong performances from the cast, just really elevate this story of a young boy's alliance with this serial killer into this kind of must watch for horror fans, especially those that had this fondness for Halloween themed movies. Um, and it just has this unique blend of just styles and just surprising emotional depth. So Satan's Little Helper definitely secures its place as one of those B movie horror classics. Definitely check it out if you haven't. I believe it's available for free on Tubi if you want to go on there and check that out for sure. But moving on to the next film. So this one was a first time watch for me. And so I heard several of my friends talk about this movie, including my friend Dana over Evil Dead Chick on YouTube. She talks about this movie quite a bit, I think, and she really, really enjoys this film. Um, I I love this movie for the nostalgic aspect of it. But other than that, I didn't really know how to feel about this. So let's just get into it. So, um, the prospect of a found footage film posing as a vintage Halloween broadcast is undeniably enticing. So the WNUF Halloween special that came out in 2013, it was directed by Chris LaMartina. It leans heavily into this kind of nostalgic premise, which is great, which I love. It offers this very unique blend of mockumentary, supernatural horror, and just dark comedy. Commercial breaks, and I think that's the biggest appeal of it when it comes to me personally. Um, and my experience with this film, as someone who just deeply appreciates horror, that and then embraces, that kind of Halloween setting and stuff. Um, it was a very interesting dive into what works and what could have been more, stronger in that as well. So the WNUF Halloween special kind of presents itself as this off-air recording of this, fictional local television stations, um, 1987 Halloween night broadcast. So the central story follows this ambitious TV reporter Frank Stewart as he decides to investigate this notoriously haunted Weber house, and it's live on air. So this house is it's the site of just a gruesome family murder. It's said to be this kind of um, has a lot of paranormal activity surrounding it, and with the son Donald Weber, who claimed this demonic possession drove him to kill his parents. So the TV reporter Frank Stewart, he's initially more concerned with ratings than genuine scares. So he assembles this crew, including these paranormal investigators, Lewis and Claire Berger, and there's this also um, the seemingly knowledgeable priest, Father Joseph Matheson, for this for this broadcast. So the film's strength kind of lies in its execution, of the found footage format, which I love the found footage format as well. So I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But um, and just that commitment to the 1980s aesthetic, the grainy visuals, just that slightly off kilter pacing, just the very, deliberate use of analog horror themes like the static, the distorted audio, that kind of creeping sense of unease. It all contributes to this very authentic feeling, retro experience. Um, the paranormal investigators, while perhaps a touch stereotypical, um, provides this kind of necessary counterpoint to Frank's initial skepticism. Um, and then Claire's psychic cat, yes, a psychic cat named Shadow, serves as this kind of early indicator of the escalating danger, and then that the cat's eventual gruesome fate is a visceral turning point. So the film effectively just kind of builds tension as the investigation delves deeper into the house, and the atmosphere just becomes just increasingly suffocating. However, where WNUF Halloween special truly shines, and perhaps unintentionally, is just that is the content, in the fake commercials, and just kind of gives you that, if you grew up in the 80s or the 90s, and that nostalgia is definitely going to hit you with that. It's like as if you're watching a real broadcast of how it was on TV back in the day. Um, and just because like I said, scattered through that whole main story that's going on here are those commercial breaks and these news segments that are both kind of hilarious and just absurd. And um but these parodies were created by various individuals. They range from advertisements for local business struggling to stay relevant in an era, to kind of these satirical, news segments about, a dentist's cash for candy, you know, thing that they got going. So these these segments aren't just filler; they are this kind of masterclass in observational comedy, and just really provides this kind of welcome dose, of levity, while simultaneously reinforcing the film's, dedication to its time period. You know, um, but some of these commercials too, while they feel like genuine artifacts from a more innocent, yet perhaps more overtly more moralistic era. Um, but anyway, getting back to the main story, as the investigation in the Weber house intensifies, the story takes this kind of significant turn, and the escalating supernatural events that force Frank and and the audience to just confront the reality of the danger. So this shift from a potentially staged paranormal investigation to a genuine terror is just handled with kind of a growing sense of dread. So the reveal that Father Joseph is not actually a priest but an actor, and he was hired by Frank to boost credibility for this broadcast, is this kind of darkly comedic twist that just highlights Frank's desperation, and that kind of deception at play. So the film's climax, while leaning into gore and a more traditional like slasher esque reveal of these deranged cultists, uh, really offers this very jolting final act. So the chilling implication that we might be viewing a copy owned by the murderers themselves, especially with the final news report about the missing persons, is very particularly unsettling, but yet memorable conclusion. Um, and as I said, despite its strengths, that um, this movie isn't without its kind of minor drawbacks, I feel. So the pacing, in the early stages can feel a little slow, I felt, for me. Um, and just while the found footage aspect is generally well executed, I'll give it that. There are moments where the story kind of relies a bit too heavily on, convenient plot devices. Just the reveal of, the human um, villains, antagonists, whatever you want to call them. While that's shocking, it does somewhat kind of ground the supernatural elements in a more conventional way, which might detract from the kind of pure analog horror feel for some purists out there. Um, but I guess in conclusion, WNUF Halloween Special is a film that that successfully taps into that kind of nostalgic heart of Halloween horror. And that is what I did truly appreciate about it. It's just this kind of this loving homage to, the low budget horror films and just local TV broadcasts, of years ago. And it really just, it offers this kind of compelling blend of, scares and that sharp satire. Um, and while some of the story, its its narrative choices might be debated, um, its commitment to atmosphere, it's clever. Um, that use just the use of the found footage gimmick and just that kind of bizarre commercial breaks. I really think this is one that you should check out and just kind of make an opinion of your own on it. So I definitely do suggest horror fans to check out this movie, because it, like I said, it feels like this kind of retro Halloween treat that just feels both familiar and kind of refreshingly original. I'll say that. But so definitely check out WNUF Halloween Special. Um, I watched this on the streaming service Shudder. So I'm not sure if it's available anywhere else, but I know that's where I watched this. So if you want to check that out, and you don't subscribe to Shudder, definitely check out Shudder because there's a lot of cool stuff on that streaming services, and it's an all horror streaming service. So yeah. So that brings me to the next movie on this list for tonight. So this next movie, I believe I started watching this movie um, once before, but something happened. I never got to finish it. So this time around, when I watched it, this was the first time I'd ever watched it all the way through, and this movie was very fitting to put on this list for Halloween based films because, like, as you know, I'm a lifelong fan. I'm devoted to all things spooky, um, and horror and Halloween based, and just for those that celebrate the magic around this time of year. There are several films out there um, that's based around the Halloween theme, but there are a few films that just really kind of manage to capture that true essence of Halloween, like an anthology film. So, and as you know, I've talked about this before because I did a whole episode on my tribute to anthology horror. This one is definitely right up there with those. Um, just when it comes to anthologies, that the quick hit of like frights and just the variety of terror and just that sheer joy, of just seeing different creative minds tackle the same kind of theme, that whole thematic playground, if you will. It's a powerful just blend of those types of things that I absolutely love. And among just that world of these Halloween themed anthologies, this movie Tales of Halloween from 2015, it stands out as just this kind of near perfect confection, just a very delightful and often disturbing journey through the heart of a single terrifying night. And this isn't just a collection of spooky short films. It is a love letter to the holiday itself. It's a well crafted just tapestry woven with these threads of classic horror themes and modern sensibilities, and just an undeniable sense of fun. Um, so Tales of Halloween is just this, like I said, it's this wonderfully ambitious horror anthology, just featuring a breathtaking roster of 10 different stories, and they're all interconnected as well, which, and they're all expertly helmed by, a different director, and they're bound together by this kind of unifying concept of Halloween night. So this isn't just, this a stringing together of just these kind of very different stories from different times. This film is remarkably cohesive, with just subtle visual cues and just recurring motifs, and just even this kind of this ghostly narrated, which is voiced with the by the legendary Adrian Barbeau, which I think is a throwback to Stevie Wayne from The Fog. um, and she helps tie all these individual tales into a kind of a larger thematic whole. um so this film premiered at the Fantasia International Film Festival in July of 2015, before it would end up gracing screens through limited theatrical runs and just video on demand in October of that same year. And it was strategically timed to kind of immerse audiences directly into that spirit of the season. So I think that was very genius on their part. Um, but the sheer talent that is involved in this is astounding. So you have directors like Neil Marshall, who did The Descent, and he also worked on Game of Thrones. You have Darren Lynn Bousman, who worked on Saw 2, 3, and 4. Lucky McKee, who we just talked about on the last episode, because he did May. He also did The Woman. And then you got the anthology's co-creators like Axel Carolyn and Andrew Cash, just alongside a host of other these accomplished horror filmmakers, like John Skip and Jay Sanderson and several others. And they just all kind of bring their unique visions to this singular Halloween landscape. And just this diversity, of directorial styles is a key strength, ensuring that each segment offers a very distinct flavor of a horror, preventing any kind of sense of, repetition. Um, so the film, masterfully blends just various subgenres of horror. We encounter vengeful spirits, creepy children, and monstrous creatures. Even this kind of darkly comedic take on the classic trick or treating experience. The segments are often linked, by this shared setting of this suburban neighborhood on Halloween night. And it allows for just a constant sense of unease, and just the feeling that danger could lurk around any corner. And just behind any elaborately carved pumpkin or whatever. So the interconnectedness isn't always overt. Sometimes it's just a glimpse, of a character from another segment in the background. And speaking of that, there is a lot of like horror, you know, classic horror actors and actresses in this. I mean, Felissa Rose is in this, Carolyn Williams, Tiffany Shepis, um, just a ton of people are featured all throughout this. Um, Joe Dante even makes an appearance. Um, but it's just this the that kind of pervasive atmosphere of dread that just it really permeates the entire film. And just this kind of structural neatness really elevates the film beyond just that simple collection of shorts, and it makes it feel like a well crafted um, story, that where each movement kind of contributes to it as a captivating whole, if you know what I mean. Does that make sense? But just the visual aesthetic is also a huge standout. I think the film just kind of fully embraces, that iconic um, feel of Halloween, just that the crisp like autumn air, the rustling leaves, the glowing jack o' lanterns, that kind of the eerie stillness of the night. There's just that kind of palpable sense of atmosphere, this a feeling of just stepping excuse me, feeling of just stepping directly into, a classic Halloween postcard or something that it's been twisted with a kind of sinister edge, if that makes sense. Um, the practical effects are often impressive in this as well, and when CGI is employed, it's generally used, to just kind of enhance the horror rather than overwhelm it. The costume design and makeup are top notch, and just it allows for this kind of parade of memorable monsters and these ghastly apparitions. Um, and while Tales of Halloween might not have achieved like that widespread, cultural saturation of a franchise like Trick or Treat, its legacy within the horror community, I think, is undeniable. And from what I understand, it's continuing to grow. For fans of the anthology format, it represents a high watermark, just a benchmark against which other Halloween themed collections are often measured. Um, I think this movie, it revitalized the Halloween anthology genre at a time when it kind of felt somewhat stagnant. For years, the holiday themed anthology was just a beloved subgenre, but fresh, high quality entries were becoming more and more rare. I think from what I can see, Tales of Halloween just arrived with kind of a diverse um, cast, of just these celebrated horror directors and these horror actors, which just have this clear passion, for the subject matter, and it just reminds audiences, of the genre's potential. It proved that with a strong concept and just these talented filmmakers, that the magic of Halloween could be, explored in just these fresh and terrifying ways. And just its sheer quality across all these multiple segments is remarkable. It's a kind of common pitfall of anthologies for some segments to fall flat while others shine. And I think Tales of Halloween largely avoids this. Um, while personal preferences will always lead to some segments being favored over others, the overall i- average of these is just incredibly high. So, from that kind of darkly whimsical Bad Seed, with its, murderous, child, to this, genuinely unsettling The Devil's Due, which features, this kind of terrifying demonic presence, and just, it. And then you also have Friday the 31st, which kind of cleverly plays with the slasher themes. It's just, and there's this consistently strong execution, these creative storytelling. Just um, I think this consistency is just a testament to the director's skill and just that unifying vision of the project. Um, and then it's the enduring appeal, I think, lies in that celebration of Halloween's kind of multifaceted nature. The film perfectly captures just that duality of the holiday. That childhood joy of dressing up and trick or treating, um, and then it's met up with just that primal fear of the dark and the supernatural, and it just kind of taps into that nostalgia of classic horror, while just incorporating these modern you know filmmaking techniques and just storytelling sensibilities. So this balance really makes it a film that can be enjoyed by seasoned horror fans and just those that are newer to the genre alike. So, it understands that Halloween isn't just about gore and jump scares. It's about atmosphere and folklore and just that thrill of the unknown. And that's exactly why I love Halloween so much. But furthermore, its influence can be seen in just a lot of other horror anthologies. While the that direct imitation is difficult to pinpoint, the success and critical reception of Tales of Halloween likely encouraged further exploration of thematic anthologies. It demonstrated that just a cohesive, narrative thread, even a loose one, can just significantly enhance an anthology film. And I think the film's success also likely bolstered the careers and reputations of each story's directors, just further solidifying their place in the horror landscape. It's the kind of film that just really inspires a generation of filmmakers to create their own spooky offerings. And couple of those movies are the barn movies, which I just watched, which I'll be talking about that in a couple episodes from now. But those movies, like, I really really love those because they have like that staple of that old school feel of horror films from the 70s and the 80s. And they also have like a lot of the old school horror actors involved, like Linnea Quigley and Doug Bradley is involved with those films, and then Joe Bob and Darcy are also in the barn too. But like I said, I'll talk more about those films from a couple days from here like the next week. Um, but I just wanted to use those as examples because, like I said, this film really helped inspire that this generation's filmmakers to just kind of create their own stories. But I guess Tales of Halloween is without a doubt, I think, an absolute triumph of the horror anthology genre. It's a film that just understands and reveres Halloween, just delivering a very diverse, engaging, and just consistently terrifying experience. Um, just the sheer talent on display from the directors, and the actors here, just these clear interwoven narratives, just that perfect, atmospheric execution really makes this a must watch, I think, for any horror fan. Especially for those who, like myself, are just drawn to that kind of spooky allure of the Halloween season. It's a film that's both just a loving tribute to the holidays traditions and just a testament to that enduring power of just creative horror storytelling. Um, each segment is just this really um, well crafted gem. It's just and all together they just form this very almost like a dark constellation of scares. I know it's like kind of a weird comparison, but if you're looking for something like that, something that just embodies the spirit of Halloween, Tales of Halloween is definitely a no-brainer. It's just a film I think that will leave you with a smile on your face. It also might scare you a little bit, so it's the best of both worlds. It's a true testament to the magic and madness of the in my opinion, the most wonderful time of the year in Halloween. Um, but yeah, so absolutely check out Tales of Halloween. It's also on Tubi for free to watch. So if you're looking for a good movie for Halloween this year that you've never watched before, or if you're just wanting to watch again, Tales of Halloween is a good one to watch. And speaking of anthology horror, that brings me to the last movie I want to talk about on this episode. So this is a brand new movie. This only came out about 3 weeks ago. Um, and I absolutely love this franchise because this is like I think the eighth film in the franchise at this point. And you guys know I'm a lifelong fan of all things horror, and just everything you would do with horror anthologies, as I just spoke about with Tales of Halloween. But the VHS series has always, from the very beginning held a special place in my heart when it comes to horror anthologies. Um, and while some of the installments, have or um, this newest one, which is VHS Halloween, has not only, in my opinion, recaptured the franchise's kind of raw, terrifying essence, but has also elevated it. I feel like this is one of the best of the entire VHS series. Um, and I'm not being biased just because it's all based around my favorite holiday and it's Halloween, but I just in like legitimately, this is to me one of the best VHS entries in the entire franchise. And this it just really delivers this truly killer Halloween themed experience that just left me full of joy and just pure entertainment. Um, and I'm already eager to watch this one again. Absolutely, and I think this isn't just another entry. It's just a kind of like a triumphant return to form. This very perfectly curated collection of nightmares that just oozes with that spirit of the season of Halloween. Um, so like I said, VHS Halloween is the eighth installment in the VHS saga. And it's a testament to its enduring appeal and just in this crowded horror landscape. So this was produced by Bloody Disgusting and it was released to the world on Shudder on October 3rd, 2025. So like I said, like 3 weeks ago. And it had its premiere at Fantastic Fest. And just this film dives head first in just to the spooky season with this just unhinged focus on Halloween. So this was just another like most anthologies. It was directed by this collective, these talented individuals, Brian Ferguson, Casper Kelly, um, R.H. Norman, Alex Ross Perry, among others. And they each bring their very unique brand of terror. And just this film masterfully weaves together these five distinct horror stories. And they're all bookended by this kind of sixth story that acts as like the glue, holding the VHS tapes together. So the core concept remains the same. Fragments of these horrifying events captured on this decaying magnetic tape. Just each offering this kind of glimpse into the abyss, as most all of the VHS films are. So, but with this one, the film's kind of overarching narrative for this one, which acts as its sixth film, is just is that terrifyingly kind of intriguing diet phantasma segment. And this one was written and directed by Brian Ferguson. So this prologue and just series of interludes plunges us into this chillingly plausible documentary experience from 1982. The Octagon Company is in their pursuit of the the next big soda sensation is testing this drink called Diet Phantasma. And however, what the unsuspecting test subjects and the watchful Dr. Rothschild don't know is that the soda is infused with this volatile essence of just these contained poltergeists. So the chilling visual of Subject 37's eyes bleeding, followed by like the can sprouting tentacles to ensnare him, it all sets this very deeply unsettling tone. And just the subsequent interludes featuring subjects 38 and 39 and the young boy subject 41 just all escalates that body horror and that supernatural dread. Subject 38's face melting off with acid, and subject 39's gruesome demise via the can itself are just very visceral and impactful. And just the chilling efficiency with which these horrific events are documented just followed by that stark implication of the subject's fates, really creates this disturbing um, just this feeling that amplifies all these individual segments. So the first of the main anthology segments is called Coochie Coochie Coo, and this one was done by Anna Zlokovic. I think is how you say her last name. So this segment taps into just the vulnerability and the recklessness of youth with this kind of terrifying twist on trick or treating. So these high schoolers, Lacey and Kaylee, they're too old for candy, but not too old for mischief, and they find themselves targeted by this the sinister entity known as the mommy or the mother. Um, and just the legend of this disappeared friend from a year prior just kind of adds this layer of a foreshadowing to their kind of increasingly desperate situation. So the discovery of this house that just seems to materialize out of nowhere is a classic horror theme, just executed with this kind of unnerving effectiveness. So the reveal of the mommy, which is this kind of spectral figure, just leaving behind these squirming fetuses and trails of milk, and her victims are just transformed into these infantile, blank-faced children, is deeply disturbing. So the tragic backstory of the mommy, which is this woman that was driven to suicide by this unwanted pregnancy, it adds this layer of just this like um desolate world to her kind of monstrous actions. The the segment ends up culminating in this kind of very heartbreaking scene where Lacey is converted into one of the mommy's brood, and Kaylee has just given up and accepts this similar fate as she joins the others, as the lullaby that seals their doom it just plays on. So, and the mommy's kind of despairing laughter at the end is just this really chilling punctuation mark, and it just really leaves the audience with this kind of profound sense of unease. um and it made me feel like really extremely creeped out, but I loved it at the same time. But the next segment in this, which is Ut Supra Sic Infra, which was directed by Paco Plaza, it was written by Alberto Marini. It takes us to this abandoned mansion in Madrid, Spain, for this truly nightmarish Halloween party. So the central mystery of like missing eyeballs and this bizarre mass murder, unravels through the police questioning the sole survivor, Enric. Um, and just the flashbacks to the party really creates this kind of palpable sense of escalating dread, and just the discovery of this telephone, this ancient telephone, and just the occult inscriptions on the walls, just all kind of immediately signal that something ancient and malevolent is at play here. Um, and then Enric's utterance of ut supra sic infra, which is as above, so below in Spanish, um, or maybe it's Latin. I'm not sure, but he says this three times, and it triggers just this terrifying descent. The crime reconstruction sequence is just particularly effective, and it showcases Enric's possessed state, his expulsion of the eyeballs, and just that unsettling levitation of these police officers. And so this kind of mastery, of atmosphere and pacing is just on full display here, and it really builds to this grotesque climax where Enric, now a conduit for these infernal forces, brutally extracts eyeballs before dropping his victims. Um, so that one's definitely a super interesting. I feel like it's one of the the best ones out of the entire out of all the stories here on the anthology. So, um, yeah, I really enjoyed watching that one, and I can't wait to watch this back again. But the next segment was done by Casper Kelly, who is a VHS veteran known for his kind of unsettling, mundane, and terrifying segments. He returns to this one with a story called Fun Size. So Fun Size is a segment that just that cleverly subverts the childhood joy of trick or treating into this very horrific ordeal. So this group of these young adults who are disappointed by just a lack of candy at this adult party um, venture out to score some more candy. So they find this bowl of at this house of these bizarrely named unsettling candies at this, and it's at this, like I said, it's at this oddly placed house, um, and that becomes the catalyst for their doom, pretty much. So the names of the candies, and there's even a penis shaped size candy bar. Um, and there is it's really off putting, but it's this kind of this subtle hint of this perversion to come. So um, there's this blackout and the sudden appearance of this hand from the candy bowl. It was very jarring, and it leads them into this nightmarish warehouse as they go inside of the bowl. Um, so this story, Fun Size itself is has its own grotesque candy mascot, which name is Fun Size, and it's just a very brilliantly realized and terrifying villain, in my opinion. It's supernatural powers and just the the brutal demises of the characters here in the story, the friends group. So like Austin being turned into a variety of candy bars, and Haley's face being blown off, and Lauren has this, she goes through this tragic escape, and um, you know she has her own following demise beyond that. It's all wildly inventive and gruesome, and just the final moments with the candy bowl attacking this mother and the child, and just and that reveal that the candy is made of human remains is just a perfect disgusting punchline that just kind of cements this segment as one of the standouts of this film. The next one, now I did like this next one, but the next story in VHS Halloween, but it's probably my least favorite out of all the stories in this one. This one's called Kid Print. And this was written directed by the supremely talented Alex Ross Perry, but Kid Print is just is immediate gut punch, um and it's set against this kind of unnerving backdrop of the fall of 1992. It's a time when just the innocence of childhood felt increasingly vulnerable. This the this segment opens with just this premise that Tim Kaplan, who is the he runs this local video store, and he captures what's called kid prints, which is essentially these video ID steals for missing children. Um, the film establishes this kind of sense of dread from the get go, and it's amplified just by this kind of chilling news of the town's child disappearances and just these gruesome murders, and Tim and his wife's anxiety to protect their daughters is just the anchor of humanity in this story that's kind of rapidly spiraling into darkness. Um, so the Halloween gathering in the town square, which is intended to be just a moment of community and perhaps just a brief respite from the unsettling news, becomes like this catalyst for true horror. So just the disappearance of a 17-year-old named Olivia, who's confirmed by her distraught mother, and just this weary police officer sends Tim back to his store, to retrieve this data. And what he discovers within the closed confines of his store is just a nightmare made manifest. So the monitors, which are meant to display search footage, instead flicker with these terrified faces of these abducted children, and either enduring unspeakable torture or just or pleading for their lives. um, so the reveal of Bruce Dittman, which is Tim's employee, terrorizing Olivia in this back room, is just a moment of shock. And this story, it skillfully peels back just the layers of Bruce's depravity, revealing him as this cunning predator who has just been weaponizing Tim's own kid print videos to locate and just ensnare his victims. And just that real ritualistic nature of Bruce's crimes is what makes kid print very, very disturbing. So it's not that this story in particular wasn't good, because it was really good, but it's just the disturbing like content of it. It all just like it is very unsettling to the point where, like, yeah, I didn't, and it's not that I didn't enjoy it, like I said, but it's just it was very bothersome because of just what it was related to, just the content of it all involving these kids being, just violated and all this, and it's just, um, I don't know, like that stuff used to not bother me, but ever since I became a dad, like my perception on a lot of films like that involving kids get killed or something really bad happening has drastically changed. But getting back to this though, like so Bruce, he forces his children, to stand before the very same height chart that they used in the kid print videos. And he's just, capturing this slow dawning realization of their, terrifying predicament before, descending into screams, I guess. Um, just, the physical torture, particularly just the graphic depiction of skinning a boy named Drew is not gratuitous, but just kind of serves to illustrate that kind of sheer, unadulterated sadism at play. Um, and I think that's why I'm not really big into like torture stuff either, to be honest with you. I mean, that's why I don't get into the Saw films or the Hostel films, and or even the Terrifier films. They just aren't for me. And just this story, even though extremely well done, it just kind of relates to those types of films, and just reminds me of why I don't like those types of films. But not not to discredit this story at all, because it definitely does. It's really well made. It's really well executed. I will give it that. But anyway, so Bruce, just lures this boy named Drew, like I said, with the promise of video games and this kind of chillingly mundane invitation that leads to his dismemberment, unfortunately. Um, so the segment story twists and turns with just a brutal efficiency. With when Bruce ambushes Tim, dressing in Drew's face as this grotesque mask, is just that kind of ensuing confusion and terror are palpable here. And Olivia and Drew, or I'm sorry, just Olivia, finding Tim in this kind of horrific state, understandably mistaking him for this accomplice of Bruce, leads to this tragic, fatal encounter. Um, so the following off-screen, murders of Olivia and Drew by Bruce are equally devastating. And Bruce's final act, filming himself in front of the kid print board, wearing Drew's face with this kind of disturbing childlike demeanor is just this kind of master stroke. Honestly, if I'm being unbiased, it's this master stroke of just psychological horror. And whether this is, a reenactment of just a past trauma or just a cruel mockery of his victims, it just kind of remains, very ambiguous. And it really just adds another layer to that kind of monstrous persona that he's created. Um, so, the fallout is just equally grim. Tim is found as this presumed perpetrator, which is a false narrative that solidifies Bruce's, insidious control here. And just his declaration to take over Kaplan Electronics and just continue the kid print, operation is just a devastating pronouncement. So the final scene, this young girl screaming before the kid print board on November 4th is just the ultimate, testament to Bruce's kind of unbroken reign of terror. And just the camera's frozen zoom on her face as the footage abruptly ends is just a haunting image that really encapsulates the film's unflinching commitment to despair. So based off of all of that, I think that for a lot of people that will watch this movie, if you like the Saw movies and the Hostel and Terrifier movies and all those types of horror films that involve a lot of torture and stuff in it, and I think there's going to be a lot of people. This will probably be their favorite story out of the five in this film. But for me, it was like my least favorite. I just like it was just too much unease for me, if I'm being honest. But that's okay. So, but that brings me back to the Diet Phantasma, which is the epilogue. It shifts gears. It's delving into a more supernatural and experimental horror. And this segment is seemingly a continuation, or perhaps this kind of separate experiment from the previous VHS installment, and unfolds in this kind of sterile, scientific setting. So Dr. Rothschild, who's driven by this, alarming, disregard for safety and just, just desperate urgency to meet deadlines, he pushes forward with this experiment, involving these subjects and just being exposed to something, contained within these soda cans, and just the technician's warning that the equipment is not designed for this many subjects is quickly dismissed by Rothschild and his impatience. Um, so the ensuing chaos that occurs is very visual, and um, auditory assault, really. So as one subject opens her can, a video camera just ignites this kind of strong omen, um, and another subject experiences as a this horrifying trauma. His tongue is ripped out, and after the can crushes itself in his mouth, and just leading to this very violent possession. So this possessed subject becomes just this instrument of just pure destruction, just crushing another subject's head with grotesque ease, and just then spewing out this black substance. It's a signature of demonic influence onto another. Um, so that extraction, a poltergeist from the subjects mostly succeeds, but the young girl who was designated as subject 47 remains possessed, and just her response of Diet Phantasma when asked what her favorite soda is a pivotal moment within this segment, just revealing that the brand as the conduit for this demonic infestation. So, like the reanimated, possessed subjects, they attempt to escape. And, this is coupled with Rothschild's kind of desperate order to immediately, manufacture and ship Diet Phantasma using that formula that Subject 47 had drank. It really paints this picture of this kind of catastrophic, unchecked evil. And just that kind of choppy frame narrative suggesting that, the researcher's demise at the hands of the possessed subjects further cements, the segment's descent into horror, I think. Um, but then that leads me to the last segment in VHS Halloween, which ended up being my absolute favorite out of all the stories in this. And this one's called Home Haunt. And this one was written and directed by Micheline Pitt Norman and R.H. Norman. And it offers a more traditional, although deeply unsettling, Halloween narrative. So there's this guy named Keith who's obsessed with just creating the ultimate haunted house experience for his family. And he finds his tradition is threatened by his now teenage son Zach's disinterest. So this kind of generational disconnect serves as a subtle counterpoint to the pure unadulterated terror to come. Um, and I can kind of relate because like my son will be a teenager in January, and I'm already starting to kind of feel this generational disconnect with him, unfortunately, in some ways. So I'm still like trying to fight to keep, that bond we had on things as he was growing up and he was real little. So I know that's a very real thing that happens between parents and their kids as they get older. So yeah, just trying to cope with that the best I can. But anyway, so back to the story. Keith's request for his son Zach to grab these supplies is just a ruse to kind of sneak into the back of the house and deliver this or discover this kind of mysterious record titled Halloween Horrors. So the act of stealing this record that he stole from this store is really the point of no return. So as Keith plays the music for these unsuspecting neighborhood people that has come to his haunted house, um, just the true nature of this record and Halloween itself is unleashed. So the music itself becomes this kind of catalyst for supernatural chaos. Um, and after it's played, the record ignites into flames, and the lights flicker out and die in the haunted house, and just the panic of all these people inside is just very immediate and visceral, and just the monsters within the decorations that Keith made, they're meant to be props. They just come to life, and each room is morphing into a distinct like area and arena of just unspeakable horrors. So the sheer scale of just this carnage, with most attendees falling victim to, these animated terrors is shocking. And you have Keith and Nancy and Zach, and they managed to escape this house. Just a brief moment of just relief, was just shattered by the appearance of this witch who snatches Zach's camera, and just that following massacre from this witch of from trick or treating children to all these people in the neighborhood is just a kind of this brutal reminder that the horror is not contained within the haunted house. And just the final image of the entrance of this haunted house, which was this big green looking monster. If you've ever seen the Goosebumps episode of where they go to like the monster themed like amusement park. I forget what it's called, but like the monster with the big green monster with the horns and stuff in that is like what this looks like at the front of this haunted house. So like it comes to life and it's like breaking free from the building, and it's just kind of this very almost iconic and terrifying conclusion that just really implies that the destruction has only just begun. And it really left me wanting more with that ending. And I would love to see a follow up to that story, if there possibly could be one. Um, but VHS Halloween, it really it stands as a strong entry in the VHS franchise. It actively reinforces and just elevates, the series' legacy. Firstly, it proves that the found footage format, when handled with creativity and just a clear thematic purpose, can still deliver, those kind of visceral frights. Just the segments in VHS Halloween are not just shaky camera work for the sake of it. They are intimate and immediate and just often claustrophobic, and they really draw, the viewer directly into the horror. um just the integration of the diet phantasma narrative really provides a much needed, meta commentary on just the nature of consumption, and um, just that the unseen horrors that can lie, beneath the surface, which is a theme that kind of resonates deeply with, the VHS series' exploration of forbidden media. But furthermore, the film's commitment to, just a specific holiday, Halloween in this case, is absolutely awesome. So this kind of thematic, anchor just allows for a more cohesive, viewing experience, and just, the filmmakers have expertly woven these Halloween themes and aesthetics into each segment. And from the trick or treating scenarios to the party atmosphere, and just that general sense, of unease that really permeates, the whole season of Halloween. This movie just perfectly, I think, captures the spirit of all of that. Just this focus not only appeals um, to devoted horror fans who love those holiday themes scares, but also just really provides, a strong identity for, the anthology, just making it a kind of a go-to, recommendation for Halloween viewing. And I know this is definitely one that I'll probably be watching year after year around this time of year. Um, and just the impact that lies in its ability to balance, these diverse forms of horror. um like the segment that, it kind of taps into that, those primal fears of motherhood and transformation, and then, the ones that just kind of delivers kind of a cult dread and that psychological torment. And and to even the ones that like Fun Size, that takes on this kind of grotesquely, satirical take on consumerism and, and childhood innocence. um you combine all that, with, the Dot Phantasma's framing device. This film offers a well-rounded and just deeply satisfying, horror buffet, really. The willingness to kind of push these boundaries with gore and psychological terror, and just, that the extreme weirdness is really what keeps, just the VHS franchise alive and kicking. The segments are not afraid to be messy or disturbing, but and they're unforgettable. And it really leaves that lasting impression, long after, this VHS tape has been ejected. But I guess in conclusion, VHS Halloween is quite simply fucking awesome. It's a love letter to just the found footage genre, an ode to the anthology format, and just this perfectly crafted Halloween horror experience. Um, the whole Diet Phantasma narrative is just a very disturbing, like, segment or series of segments, I guess you could say, that really just elevates the entire film. And just just the each of these segments that, that's intertwined, like the, Coochie Coochie Coo and Fun Size and Home Haunt. It's all of them together, is just this powerful dose of terror in their own right. And they just really, they showcase this very remarkable range of just, this directorial vision, and just a shared, commitment to delivering these genuine scares. uh you know so just from, the disturbing, like, domestic horror to these occult infested, horrors. It's just all of it just is there's something for every horror fan, I think, in this one. And this is the kind of film that will really have you checking your kids' candy, or double checking just your locks, or just kind of eagerly anticipating that next kind of cursed piece of media to just emerge from the static. It's an essential watch, I think, for any fan of the VHS series, and it's absolutely one of my top favorites of the whole franchise. um, and so I mean, definitely it just has that raw feel to it. Once again, I feel like it's VHS is the VHS franchise is back where it should have been all along. It definitely brought its A game with this one, and a whole lot of blood to the party at that. So definitely go check this one out. This one's on Shutter as well. Said this one just came. It's still basically brand new. Just came out like 3 weeks ago. I highly, highly recommend this one to all horror fans out there, and especially fans of the VHS franchise. But guys, I guess that's it for this episode. I will be back later tonight, about probably around 10 o'clock or 10:30, somewhere around there that time, where I'm going to be talking about the Back to the Future trilogy. So if you're interested in checking that out, please do come back to the live stream for that. If you're not able to, be sure to check it out on the replay sometime later on. So I'm just going to be diving completely into the whole Back to the Future trilogy, and just everything that I love about it. And so, any fans of that series, definitely check that one out when I do that. But I want to thank everyone who watched this live, or if you're watching this on the replay. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and watching this. It means a lot to me. Please drop me a comment below on what your favorite of these movies that I talked about, if you've seen any of them. If not, you could just tell me about one of your other favorite Halloween themed movies. Um, as always, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate that. That would help me out a whole lot. And if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button down below to catch more videos from me like this one. And as always, click that bell for any future notifications. But with all that said, I'm Crater. This is CraterMania. I love you guys. Have a good night.